Hi, I'm James, the commercial director of the cybersecurity company Cysiam. This is the third video I've made charting my mission in this lockdown period to learn a bit more about the technical side of what our company does. This time I'm talking to Dave Allan, the CTO here at Cysiam, about intrusion detection and incident response. It was a great conversation about some really important aspects of the whole cybersecurity process. So I hope you enjoy the content and find it of some use. I'll be back at the end of the video with a few of the links that are mentioned throughout the conversation and a bit more waffle. Thanks. Hope you enjoy the video. Hi. So I'm here today with Dave, our CTO and co-founder of Cysiam. Morning, Dave. How are you doing?
Morning, James. Yeah, very well. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Turning into a show, isn't it? Yeah. Well, we got our coffee and we know what subject we're going to be talking about, so that's a good start for it all. So, Dave, today's topic is about intrusion detection and incident response. What's all this about? So, bear in mind your audience. You know, I'm non-tech, and I know the subject can get very technical. So, I thought, in terms of kind of expanding my knowledge and understanding of this subject, we could start with me as a non-technical director of a company. What are the signs to me that my company or myself have been breached? And what should I be looking out for? What signs should I be concerned about?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think a lot of companies expect there to be a big flag. You've been infected, or you've been hacked, or your data's been stolen. But you can almost liken it to like someone breaking into your office. If someone broke into your office without leaving any trace of how they got in, and they were stealing one file a day or photocopying one file overnight and taking it away, then you wouldn't notice. You'd need all your security prevention mechanisms to be able to spot that intruder, whether it be your CCTV camera, your security guard, somebody noticing something slightly different in the morning when they come in from work. So there's no real right answer for what things should you look out for. It's more what things can you put in place to help you stop it in the first place, which is what the whole cybersecurity thing's about anyway. B, identify it when it's happening, or C, respond to it. So if we ignore A for now, because we'll cover that through the whole series of conversations that you're having, I mainly focus on how do you identify it when it's happening, and how do you respond when it's happened. I think they're the two most important bits.
Yeah.
And you're going to get some attacks that are really obvious. So when during the WannaCry attack for the NHS years ago, all the screens were all the screens were locked, and it said pay a ransom, and so that's a really obvious indicator of you've been hacked. There's nothing more obvious than you can't get into your computer.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about someone who wants to steal your information and has a target attack against your organization, it's very unlikely that as a leader of a business, or as part of the non-technical part of a business, you're gonna see any indication of any attack actually happening. It'll mainly be the technical teams that spot people creating new administrative accounts that shouldn't be there. People trying to log on lots of times to a single account out of hours, with an IP address originating from an unusual country. These, but attackers are sophisticated, and so you get the full breadth of things. So the things that people would look out for are people doing some sort of scanning of your external devices, looking for vulnerabilities to exploit. That's one method. You would see lateral movement around a network. So that's where somebody's already got into the network and has gained an initial foothold, and then they're moving around the network looking for their ultimate target. You would see unusual accounts being created, and again, like I said before, unusual activity out of hours, but they're just some of the indicators. I think it's
So
the amount
these are things that would be picked up by by my IT specialists.
potentially. So there's different mechanisms. You've got your if you think about your security as lots of layers, you've got your firewall, which should stop a lot of this sort of traffic, but it also provides you with the reporting that allows you to see what sort of activity you're blocking on that firewall. So that gives you your sort of first indicator, if you like. You're like, right, my firewall is blocking this sort of activity, and then you can start to interrogate that data and get a sense of what sort of attacks are trying to be launched against your organization. But again, that's only if someone's trying to come through that way directly.
Yeah.
Another way would be around phishing emails, being able to spot those. It's a really interesting problem, and there's a whole industry around incident response and intrusion protection and intrusion detection for this very reason, because it's incredibly complicated, and the routes that an attacker can take to get into your organization can be very convoluted, very complex, and very subtle and very stealthy. So trying to find one way that picks apart all that is really tricky.
Okay.
So from what we say and what we always say, the basics done well with any organization gets rid of 99% of all that.
Yeah. So I was going to say next, what should I? Okay. So on the understanding that I might or might not spot a breach, let's make, I as a company director should make the assumption that there is going to be a breach at some point. So let's get our cyber hygiene right, which is what Tom and I covered in the last interview. But how should I react? So if, say I found that I do have a breach, my cyber hygiene has been good but has failed. Somebody's managed to get in. What, as a non-tech company director, what should I do first? And also, what should I not do? Presumably I can do some things that would compromise an incident response that happens later on, or or damage some data forensics, or I could do something to really complicate the problem later down the line. So what should I do? What should I avoid doing?
So I think there's probably three parts. There's the technical response, there's the internal company response, and then there's the external company response. I think for the internal technical response, you've got to trust your IT guys. They'll know your infrastructure better than anyone. They'll know how it all sticks together. They'll know what's normal and what's not normal. You've got to trust them to make decisions around that infrastructure, and get expert help. There are companies that specialize in incident response. There are companies that specialize in disaster recovery. This isn't the time to be worried about, should I pay £500 a day rate or a £700 a day rate for incident response? This is the time just to get somebody in and get your business back up and running.
Yeah.
The internal response is equally as important. Being able to communicate the technical subject matter that your engineers will, they'll be communicating a language that you may not understand, and talking about child processes and threads and all sorts of stuff like that. It just won't really, doesn't matter to you anyway. But what you need to be able to do is take all that information, or find someone who can take all that information and turn it into a language that the rest of your organization understands. Yeah. So it's not about panic. It's not about everyone turn their computers off. It's about a calm response to a problem, and then that then will naturally falls into your external response. So the external response is really, really important. I think the way you communicate to your clients, your customers, and your investors, or whoever it is really important. We've seen some really good examples and some really bad examples. So we've seen some examples of companies trying to cover it up, where they say, no, everything's okay. There's been no data stolen. We think everything's fine. And then a week later, something's happened. All of our data's been stolen, and it just looks bad.
And a week's a long time if I've had my company credit card details stolen and sold on the web. Yeah.
I think there was Amnesty International were really good at their external communications, and I think what a lot of companies do is they turn it into a either a blame game or they're embarrassed about the whole thing. When in reality, it's either going to be an accident, someone's done something wrong, in which case figure out why and make sure it doesn't happen again. So it's a procedural thing, or it's a criminal activity. Someone has broken into your organization and stolen your property. So you need to treat it as a criminal activity, and that's exactly what Amnesty International did. Rather than say we've got an IT issue, we're dealing with it, things will be okay. They just said we've been attacked. We don't know what the root cause is. The police are involved, and we'll communicate further when we know more from the police. Until then, any accounts, anything like that, change your passwords, do some basic sort of individual hygiene, and we'll get back to you when we've got more information from the police. So they immediately turned it into a criminal issue, and so the communications were then one about reassurance. It's more about we're doing everything we can. We've got the police involved. We're looking for the people that have attacked us, and collectively we'll do something about it, rather than this sort of. And I can see why people feel embarrassed about it. But you wouldn't feel embarrassed.
They're also probably quite concerned about the damage to their reputation and damage to the brand.
Yeah.
So it's an embarrassment, but it's also a kind of practical impact on the future business, isn't it?
But I think that's the problem. I think people look at the reputational side of this and see a cyber attack as an embarrassing thing that damages their reputation. Whereas if they communicate it well, if they communicate it in the right sort of way, then it shouldn't be it should be like someone breaking into your office. If someone broke into your office and stole all your computers, you wouldn't be embarrassed about communicating it. You would just say, someone's broken into my office, stolen all my computers. Let's get the police involved. But it's the same principle. It's the same thing, but people don't see it in that way. And I think until people start to think about it in that way, then companies will feel embarrassed about their data being stolen. I think the crux of it is as long as you do the basics well. So like your cyber hygiene conversation with Tom, if companies do the basic well, they invest in the right sort of way, not going to buy some £1 million super AI vendor solution that's going to solve all your problems, but just do 2FA on key accounts, separate administrative domains, separate individual logons for all the stuff you put on. I'm not going to go over it now, but all that. If you do all that and you get breached, well, that's you've done what you can.
Yeah, and then it's your preparations for when it happens that start kicking in.
It's how you respond then.
Yeah. So if someone broke into my office and stole a load of computers and stuff, I'd want to call the police. I'd want to, I want an incident that's taken seriously. But I probably would also want to find out who did it and bring them to justice. Is that something that happens in the incident response world? And if it does, how do you do that? I mean, these are international criminals, right?
Yeah, I think that's the tricky thing. I think we need to get away from finding a person and apportioning blame to that individual and bring them to justice. It's just so unlikely. If the attack originates in a country with no extradition to the UK, then there's not a lot you can do. And that, to be fair, that's where a lot of the criminal activity comes from, where legislation within that domestic country.
So are there bodies that would deal with that and would be interested in the kind of data forensic information for an attack on my company that they might be able to collate and put together a kind of more national response to this sort of thing?
Yeah, so the NCSC do what's called active cyber defense, where they do things around the DNS for the country, so blocking malicious domains before they even come to the UK.
Right.
But that really is just to reduce the level of spam in the UK, and stop granny click on the link. It doesn't really do anything about targeted attacks. So I think there are lots of companies, there are lots of good threat intelligence companies, Mandiant FireEye or Trend Micro or BAE Applied Intelligence, all the big guys that provide really good threat intelligence on cyber. But it's only threat intelligence that allows you to take preventive action. So again, using the office analogy, or having having a list of all the criminals and all the registration plates of all the vans that might want to case over your office are useless if you've got no CCTV, you leave your front door open overnight, you've got no security guard, and there's no access control into your office. So, before you start worrying about buying expensive solutions or buying expensive sets of data to allow you to protect the threat, putting a lock on your front door, having a security guard watching over it, putting CCTV in, the next level of maturity, maybe linking that to some sort of response. There's all these sorts of things that you can do for your office. And if you apply that to your information security and your IT, then you can install endpoint protection on your devices. So let's say as a company you all decide to use Apple Macs. Well, that's great, because then you can deploy one sort of host level protection on all of your Apple Macs, and you can have them all identify what devices you've got, identify where they are in a given moment in time, identify who's got access to what resources, and have a really nicely controlled environment. And it's the same with phones. It's the same with any sort of devices, and that's why things like bring your own device and having a really diverse IT infrastructure, sort of where people got their own laptop, it becomes really difficult to control, because you lose the ability to provide a base level of security across all those assets.
Yeah. So Tom and I talked about that in one of the earlier interviews. But knowing your estate well is a good part of cyber defense. But actually, also enables you to respond to an incident better, presumably, because you've got a common platform which is much more easy to investigate, easy to map out problems, and
then some of the stuff that you wouldn't normally associate with cyber. So like things like a configuration management database, an effective change control process and policy. So when something does go wrong, the investigation is sped up, because you can look at that change control log and say, right, well, we had this thing happen at midnight last night. Well, let's look at the change log and see what's happened prior to that or at that moment in time. Okay, nothing. Right, great. So now we know something's happened outside of change control that was unauthorized, that made this thing happen, or is associated with this event. And then that provides a useful start point. So, but that's service management, that's ITIL stuff that you wouldn't normally necessarily associate with incident response.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I also have some legal responsibilities to let authorities know if I've been breached, under GDPR and what have you. Especially if I'm holding people's information. So I think maybe we can put a link at the end of this interview to some sites where information about that is available.
Yeah, I mean, it might be worth one of your little side notes about some of the big figures, because I haven't got them to hand.
Yeah.
But I think you might have talked before, 2% of annual turnover for as a fine by the ICO. 4%, yeah, but by the ICO. But I mean, if you've taken the appropriate measures to protect that data, and you get done over, then you won't get fined. Like that's the bottom line. Like that is a big stick for companies that don't invest in their own security and the protection of their clients' data. But the reality is, if you've done the basics and you've been done over by someone, then there's no reason to fine the organization. There's no reason to punish someone who's done what was expected of them by the ICO.
Yeah. So these are, they've been given some pretty big teeth. 4% of global corporate turnover, is huge.
Yeah.
I think I did some research earlier that BA were facing a fine of 180 million pounds or something, staggering amounts of money. But I guess it's, this is indicative of how important cyber is and how damaging it is when you get it wrong and you don't deal with it properly, right?
Yeah. I think it's trying to highlight that the data you've got isn't necessarily your data, but the data you've got, you do have a duty to protect it.
Yeah, and so in our experience of dealing with incident responses, it's not just I've heard it's not just the IT department that we we go in and talk to and work with to respond to an incident. Is it's everyone within the company has to be involved in a good response to a big cyber breach, right?
Every instance different, and
right.
And I think, going back to the question you asked before, what shouldn't you do? And I think I didn't answer that one very well. But so I think you don't improvise. Don't try and think as a leader. Don't try and do your own thing. I think, right, I know what I'll do. I'll unplug things.
Yeah.
Don't go quiet. Don't try and cover it up. And don't make any false statements. Just be open about the fact it's happened and speak to the police. That's the first bit. But after that, it really depends on the instance. So we. Careful not to name any names. We had an incident with I managed an IT service provider and one of their clients, and the client they had a ransomware attack on one of their servers, and so the incident itself really was, can we get the data back from that server? So once we did our initial investigation, the answer was no. The answer was that they encrypted the server. The data on the server was kept on the same server as the backup, so the backup was encrypted as well, and so the initial reaction was, no, it's gone. The data's gone unless you pay the ransom, which we don't advise you do because it's just creating a market for it.
Yeah.
And even then, you're not guaranteed to get your data back. So then the question moved on to, right, well, whose fault is it? How do we apportion blame? And they sort of missed the point about it being a criminal issue first and foremost, about reporting it properly to the police. And it become a blame game of the client trying to say to the IT provider, this is your fault, or we're going to report you to the ICO. Then the service provider going back to the client saying, well, I sent you an email last month about this contract that needs to be renewed, and we offered extra services to offer you an offsite backup and all this sort of stuff, and you didn't click on it. You hadn't replied to this email, and it's all irrelevant, really. It's all, if it did have followed the basic stuff well from the start, then this incident wouldn't have happened. If they'd have had a separate backup, if they'd have had the appropriate controls and the appropriate access to that server, if they'd have had a better contract maybe that showed where the responsibility lay for cyber incidents. I mean, it's something that you and I have talked about quite a lot. The supply chain issues around cyber breaches are particularly pertinent, and I think the contractual obligations between parties when it comes down to a breach are very, very immature. I think in the UK, from everything that we've seen, it's very rare you see a relationship between an IT service provider and the client that explicitly mentions what happens in the event of a breach and shows the correct levels of liability.
Yeah, an apportionment between the parties. Yeah,
exactly. And what we see more than anything else really is, if you've been, if something happens, if you lose your service, more about availability than it is security. If you lose your service, then we're liable for, months worth of the contract value, rather than if a multi-million-pound company goes under, how do they recover? And if the fault is in the IT provider, how do they recover that cost?
Yeah,
most of the contracts that we've seen, they wouldn't be able to. So there's, it's this whole thing is such a big subject, and I know it's the technical side of it itself is a big subject. That there's a lot to go into instant response, but the procedural side and the business management side is a big subject. You've got organizations, you've got people that can do a master's degree in disaster recovery or business response, and it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of your organizational risk. So the incidents are as varied as the organizations. There's no template, and how you respond will be as varied as the type of instance that can happen.
Yeah, but I guess that the key messages really are, as they were with all the other interviews I've done, do your cyber hygiene right. Understand what that is, make that part of your company culture, and follow up on it. Make sure that it's continual. It's not a one-time thing. It's it's an evolving process, and you need to keep on top of it.
Yeah.
And the second one is kind of rehearse, prepare, understand what you're going to do in cases of an incident. And we talked about loads of components of that and what that means, but actually running through it, rehearsing it, and planning it. And then I guess the third point is understand what your legal obligations are in cases of a breach, because the fines are heavy, and you don't want to further damage your customers, your clients, your reputation as a result of getting mishandling an incident.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right, and I think technically, as if to help with any response, if you're doing your logging effectively, identify what you need to log, identify your critical assets and harden them, and then identify all the other assets that you own in some sort of configuration management database or whatever you call it. But having those things to hand, so when someone does come onto your site with their backpack of, right, we're going to investigate this incident, you can confidently say, right, this is where all my log data is, these are all my assets, and here's a timeline of what happened. Over to you. To an investigator, that's gold dust. That's really helps the investigation and the analysis from the start point.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Dave. I think that's probably about as much time as we've got. Thanks a lot. That's been really good, really interesting conversation. I've learned loads about incident response that I've heard bits about it, but you've cleared up a lot of issues for me. So thank you very much. Maybe we'll see you again on another interview in the future, but thanks a lot for your time this morning. Cheers, Dave.
Lovely, James. Mate, thank you very much. Take care, brother. Bye.
Hi there, James again. I hope you enjoyed that chat as much as we enjoyed making it. I think you'll agree Dave is great at explaining complex topics in layman's terms, so that even I felt I learned way more from that interview than I could pick up from reading books or blogs that are often pitched to people like me at too technical a level. Anyway, thanks for watching. Keep tuned for the next installment, and subscribe to the channel. If you have any comments, you can always leave them here on YouTube or via our website at cysiam.com. Alongside this section of the video should be the links to the various bits and pieces that were mentioned throughout. And yeah, see you on the next one. Okay, bye.